Okay, let's hope that we still have everyone online here. And what we'll want to do, let's see, do we? What I'll do is put this mic right here, and we'd like to ask you to come up to the mic, and we'll take online questions as well. This is for all of the panelists that we've had. Starting with Sarah and ending with our last talk. So let me ask if there's questions, David.
Yes, I think this is a question for Jake. What's the status of the XEMU suit for the lunar surface?
Yeah, thanks, David. So that's an Axiom design, so they're working through it. You want me up there? Sorry. Yeah, so Axiom's working through that right now. They're going through various testing, so they have kind of the suit, the soft part of the suit design. They're actually, some of those slides we showed show that they are working on just surface ops kind of stuff with that. But they're also then working on the PLIS right now, so that's the life support aspect to it. So they're still in design, they're working through that. I mean, I'm not in any position to divulge the company's current status on that, but it's in design and they're working through it.
Thanks, Jake. Yeah, Ben. And if you could just announce your name and affiliation.
Yeah, sorry, Ben Buster, Intuitive Machines. Question for Brad. Brad, it's a question on, I see you perk up, question on Prism 4. Thank you for getting the draft out, that was handy. And you mentioned it was similar to Prism 3, and one key aspect was how you're handling mobility. And I think it's great how you got it right now, so a PI can ask for mobility. But one feedback we tried to give, and I'm curious to know if you're still considering this, is you essentially have a pot of money for mobility, which currently now sits in the task order side. Have you considered moving that to the Prism side so that a PI can take that money and propose a instrument suite mobility combined solution? So it doesn't cost there's no difference in the overall cost, but you're giving the PI the flexibility that if they have, say, an instrument suite that has complicated interfaces, so you know you're going to get dinged in the review, but you already solve those with a mobility provider, that you at least have the option to propose combined mobility instrument suite, but you allow them a little more, you allow them that pot of money to do so.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So there's a lot of nuance to your question there. When you think about it, if you take the mobility efforts over into the science side, that's a net loss to science overall, where you could be using those funds for extra payloads, other aspects to the suites of instruments. And so as opposed to when you have the mobility on the CLIPS side, then you end up with more money for science, and we are enabling and encouraging that level of service from providers overall. And if we can get the community to start having the mindset of, hey, here's a build to print rover that has X amount of capability, and then over here there's another rover that has different amount of capability, which one fits my science the best? I think overall we would have a cost savings that would, in the long run, enhance more science. And so I'm not saying that it's off the table completely, but I will say that we are encouraging the community to use vendor services for mobility.
Okay, so as there's no other questions, Greg says I can push back slightly. I'm going to push back on you saying I don't understand why you're saying it's less money for science. So let's take a hypothetical example that you're allowing 10 million within the task order for whoever wins to provide the mobility. What I'm saying is you give the PI 60 million and they provide a mixture of mobility and science. So it's the same amount of money spent. It isn't less. I don't understand why it's less money for science.
So, sorry, one thing that I neglected to share is that the two buckets of money for payload development and for CLIPS delivery, you can't cross the streams. if use a Ghostbusters reference. And so you can't take money out of CLIPS delivery funds that should have gone to the vendors/industry because that's set forth by congressional appropriations. And so we can't just arbitrarily take funds out of one bucket and throw them in another.
Great, thanks, thanks, Brad. We're taking online questions as well. Maybe it would be good if you put them in chat, and then we can read them. Dr. Neal over here has a question.
Hey, what do you mean? He's trying to be polite and failing dismally. So many questions. How many can I ask? I have a question for Jake, because he's standing there looking forlorn. Can you give us an update on Artemis 3 and specifically the orbital refueling schedule that SpaceX needs to do in order to go to the moon and come back again? That's something that I've not seen in the news. But is there a schedule so they can meet the Artemis 3 deadline?
Well, the short answer that I can give you is no. I can't answer the question for you. Are they working through that? Yes, they do. Much like David's question, I cannot provide to you the details of how the companies are handling their testing. You haven't seen it online because they haven't published it.
Yeah.
They have a plan and they're working through it. And you see them working through their plans. They're trying to get their heavy launch going. If you think back to the beginning of Apollo, the Saturn V was going through very similar testing, right? They're learning as they're going, but you're correct, that is a step they're going to have to do once they can get into orbit and work through it.
Yeah, I agree. Am I allowed to ask another one? Not of Jake.
All right. I'm glad I didn't have to say that I don't have the definition of sustainability.
Well,
it's now ISEG is working on it.
Okay, well, I asked Jake and Brad and Sarah last year, where do I go to NASA to get funding to do resource prospecting? And they said they were working on it. It's been a year. Where do I go to NASA for funding to do resource prospecting?
Hey, Clive, how would you define prospecting?
You're going to have to listen to my talk that follows this.
Well, then I'll answer your question later. Jake probably has a much more non-pithy answer than myself.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that we're working through that through the architecture concept review. We do have ISRU activities now built into the review so that we can begin to assess where the ISRU payoff starts to, the hard part here is that the prospecting or resource exploration part of this is part of a multifaceted, complicated equation to determine what the value of the resource will be. So we have to work through that and make sure we understand what we're even looking for specifically. Now, I know you probably have specific ideas about what you want us to look for, as do most other folks, but there are potentially several different pathways that we take. And the first step is trying to understand where that payoff starts to come in, because we need resources on every mission, and currently we bring all of them with us. At some point, the work that goes into it will show us that there is a return on the investment so that it is worth putting that investment in now. Again, there's multiple potential pathways. So what I can tell you is that all the directorates are working together to do those evaluations about where that ISRU payoff comes in so that we can make the right choices now. What we don't want to do is start in making the wrong choices. So I think there are, I don't want to speak for SMD, but at the moment there are payload opportunities through SMD. You heard several folks talking about it, both Sarah and Brad, but we haven't laid out the specific architecture strategy for which resource we're necessarily going after. So I know we still haven't given you the super clear answer that you want, but I can tell you that we are working on it, and it is now built into our architecture assessment process. It's always next year, Clive.
Well, the one thing I will add, and I talked about it in my presentation as well, is with the payloads that we had on IM2, a lot of those were focused around volatiles, and so we recognize that understanding the nature of volatiles and distribution therein, that is one of the primary Moon to Mars objectives that we drafted, LPS-3, right? And if you go into the Prism 4 community announcement that's live at the link that was on the charts, you can see that while we are open to global investigations, you can see in there that we do highly encourage volatile investigations at or around the South Polar region. So that, if to answer your question, if you want to go for funding, Prism 4 might be your next best option for, or at least near-term funding for resource investigations.
All right. Okay, James Doughton, Brown University. This question isn't directed at anyone specifically. Maybe Jake, since you're standing there. It's a rather uncomfortable question, but I think it's relevant. And I couldn't help but wonder, after seeing, the various images of, U.S. astronauts on the moon, us setting up various things, putting on, different landers, etc. Are there discussions related to, I guess, how our efforts interplay with the rest of the world and how we are keeping peace? And also, as seeing these calls for like participating scientists, I'm wondering, if I apply, would I be participating in something that is indeed helping the greater good for the world and humans? Or with all of this really complicated, intertwined thing with industry that keeps a lot of secrets until things come out, is that something that, are all of our, moralities aligned with what we're doing when we do get to the moon?
Yeah, that's not an uncomfortable question. I think that's a really important question. And we do work on exactly that through multiple different avenues of communicating both internationally and across industry and academia. Like almost all these questions, there's no super satisfying, here's the answer to your question. What I can say is you just heard Setal talking about how we're interfacing with other nations on laying out their plans. We don't even know how to align moralities if we don't know what their plans might look like. So the first key is communication, and then we choose another key step, which is documentation. So all we can really do at the moment is get that laid out, explain what our nation's plans are. The other area where we work this is the Artemis Accords. So the Artemis Accords are with countries. They're agreements with countries, not with agencies. So we work with agencies through ISEG, we work with countries through the Artemis Accords, and in the Artemis Accords, we have laid out what our approach, what our philosophical approach is to, spacefaring behavior. And we've asked other countries to sign on, and many have. And I almost need to look weekly to know how many are on there, but it's up in the many tens now. So we have conversations through those mechanisms. Is it a satisfying, complete answer that's perfect? No. But it is a negotiation that starts with us being transparent about what our intentions are, and then continuing to uphold those conversations routinely as other nations, other entities, industry develop what their plans look like. So, it's, not uncomfortable to talk about that. It's something that we talk about routinely, and the only way you get there is by having those communications. That's my thought. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that.
I would like to add a little bit, Jake. I think your question is a wonderful one. This is exactly why I set up our international program at the then NASA Lunar Science Institute 17 years ago. I always like to say, and Gordon Osinski loves it when I say it, our first scientists were actually Canadian. we signed a partnership with them before we brought on our first domestic teams. And that program, which Christina now runs very capably, has produced the European Lunar Symposium. Christina and I were just there a month ago, and that further spawned the African Lunar Symposium, the first one of which was held in March. The next one is in Botswana next March. And then I had discussions with a gentleman from Colombia and then a couple of people from Asia about establishing an Asian Lunar Symposium and a Latin American Lunar Symposium, and so our international program at Survey, which again, Christina has done a fabulous job at running since I became director, is an integral part of what we do. And so we've talked with the Office of International and Interagency Relations for years, and they see us as a mechanism, not the mechanism, for what do you do after you sign the Artemis Accords, And so we have discussions with these nations, and we establish new programs. So what you say is absolutely vital. I always like to say, that things are different from when we had the space race, right? Then it was the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Now it's the whole world. The whole world is going back to the moon. What a time we live in, and it's great to be a part of it.
Hey, Greg, if I could add just 30 seconds onto that and what Jake said is, I definitely encourage you to look through the Moon to Mars objectives. In there, and one of the recurring tenets, you do talk about ethics, the ethics of exploration, and how that is a responsibility of ours. We also talk in there about the importance of preserving certain aspects of planetary science and others, so that we can preserve the capability to conduct higher technology and more thorough investigations at some point in the future. The other thing I would point you to is we recently conducted an Artemis Ethics and Society workshop that resulted in a publication. It was by Zach Pirtle from our office here at SEO. It's a really good read and helps you understand, kind of our ethical obligation, as we go through and conduct these investigations through exploration.
So, and we're going to need to end this particular session, but I want to say something first, and that's how much of a privilege it's been to work with all the folks at headquarters and just thank them for their support, not just this year, but for years and years and years, right? And when you look at it, I think about when we started, or maybe even a long time ago when I was at NASA headquarters, how incredibly siloed things were. But look up there. We have, we have Jake from ESDMD. We have Brad and Shatul from SCO. We have Kristen from STMD. We have Sarah from and Amanda, whose picture is not showing right now, from SMD. And they're all working together. And we shouldn't take that for granted. Because I remember a time not that many years ago when that was not the case at all. And so, guys, it's been wonderful working with you. What a privilege it's been, and thank you so much for your support and your leadership. And thank you for a great session here. Can we give them a hand, please?